Alright, this is Deuteronomy 17 in the MacArthur Study Bible. Let's begin. You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God a bull or sheep which has any blemish or defect, for that is an abomination to the Lord your God. If there is found among you within any of your gates, which the Lord your God gives you, a man or a woman who has been wicked in the sight of the Lord your God in transgressing his covenant, who has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, either the sun or the moon or any host of heaven, or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it is told to you, and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently. And if it is indeed true and certain that such an abomination has been committed in Israel, then you shall bring out to your gates the man or woman who has committed that wicked thing, and stone him to death. Yes, stone to death that man or woman with stones. And whoever is deserving of death shall be put to death on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And he shall not be put to death on the testimony of 1 witness. And the hands of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. So you shall put away the evil from among you. And if a matter arises which is too hard for you to judge, between degrees of guilt for bloodshed, between one judgment or another, or between one punishment or another, matters of controversy within your gates, then you shall arise and go up to the place which the Lord your God chooses. And you shall come there to the priests and to the Levites and to the judge there in those days, and inquire of them. They shall pronounce upon you the sentence of judgment. And you shall do according to the sentence which they pronounce upon you in that place which the Lord chooses. And you shall be careful to do according to all that they order you, according to the sentence of the law in which they instruct you, according to the judgment which they tell you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left from the sentence which they pronounce upon you. Now the man who acts presumptuously and will not heed the priest who stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or the judge, that man shall die. And so you shall put away the evil from Israel, and all the people shall hear and fear and no longer act presumptuously. And when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and possess it and dwell in it, and say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your brethren you shall set as king over you. You may not set a foreigner over you. You may not set a foreigner over you, who is not your brother. But he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, for the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way again. Neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he greatly multiply silver and gold for himself. Also it shall be, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write for himself a copy of this law in a book, from the one before the priests and the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, and be careful to observe all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted above his brethren, that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, and that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. And may the Lord bless the reading of the word. Let's look at the notes. Alright, so the first few verses 1 and 2, actually it's just verse 1, talks about don't bring any defective animals as sacrifices. So to bring a defective sacrifice to the Lord was to bring something into the sanctuary that was forbidden. Such a sacrifice was an abomination to the Lord. To offer less than the best to God was to despise his name. See Malachi 1, 6 through 8, where God, through the prophet Malachi, is rebuking the Israelites for bringing profaned sacrifices. And offering a less than perfect sacrifice was in effect failing to acknowledge God as the ultimate provider of all that was best in life. And also, it had to take the perfect sacrifice to wash away sins. So, no perfect sacrifice, then there was no atonement for sins. That's the other big reason. Yep, and ultimately pointing to the perfect, spotless sacrifice, Jesus. So, that's why it matters. Alright, and then verses 3 through 7. It's about what happens if you find out somebody's an idolater. And the local judges were to see that false worshippers were executed, so that idolatry was dealt with severely, so that the people wouldn't dare to be worshiping other gods. Well, sadly, I guess they didn't follow these commandments very well, since Israel turned to idolatry constantly. So, yeah, they should have followed these ones well, but didn't happen. Yeah, well, the Lord put idolaters to death through judgment. Yeah, he cut away kings in the northern kingdom that worshipped idols. Yeah, he got rid of those households. So, anyway, but the person that's said to be an idolater cannot be, declared guilty unless there's 2 or 3 witnesses that would testify that that's the case, that person is an idolater. The execution of the idolater cannot take place on the basis of hearsay, which, hearsay is, well, I heard that this person is guilty of idolatry, so there you go. Yeah, but you don't have any definitive proof of it. There needs to be proof from 2 or 3 witnesses who saw this person do it. Yep. There had to be at least 2 valid witnesses against the accused person in order for a case to be established. 1 witness was not sufficient in a case of this severity, and this standard avoided false testimony. Yep. Because if it was just one witness, it could be easier for that witness to lie in order to save that person who's the defendant. So, and if you're bearing false witness, then you would be punished too. So better not do that either. And I think you would get the same punishment as the defendant, as the accused. And the way in which the execution was carried out emphasized the burden of responsibility for truthful testimony that rested on the witnesses in a case involving capital punishment. The witnesses, by casting the first stone, accepted responsibility for their testimony. Yep. And then even in church discipline today, well, if the person doesn't listen the first time, then you have to bring 2 or 3 in order to establish, witnesses. And if they don't listen again, then you tell it to the church. So kind of a modern day version. Yeah, now we don't put people to death, obviously. This is not the this is not the, civil law. Yeah, because these were the punishments that ancient Israel would have to fulfill. Yeah, but we don't do that today. So, yeah, but we do discipline and excommunicate. Or at least we should. if it comes to it. All right, but if a matter is too hard to judge, then you got to go to the sanctuary, the central sanctuary, the tabernacle, or then the temple. If a judge thought the case was too difficult for him to decide, he could take it to a central tribunal consisting of priests and an officiating chief judge to be established at the future site of the central sanctuary. And the decision of that tribunal would be final, and anyone refusing to abide by that court's decision was subject to the death penalty. Yep, so you better listen to what the judges pronounce on you, otherwise you're dead. So, there you go. So, God takes this very seriously. Yep, well, you'll get the eternal death penalty if you don't listen to the ultimate judge, Jesus. So, there you go. Alright, and then you get to laws concerning kings. And the office of kingship was anticipated by Moses in the Pentateuch, first 5 books. And he anticipated the time when the people would ask for a king, and here gave explicit instruction concerning the qualifications of that future king. Yep. And he was right, because they did eventually ask for a king in 1 Samuel. But the king had to be among their brethren, could not be a foreigner. So how the Lord would make that choice was not said, but the field was narrowed down by the specification that he must be a brother Israelite. Alright, and then there's restrictions that were placed on the king. 1, he could not acquire many horses. 2, he must not take up multiple wives. 3, he must not accumulate much silver and gold. The king was not to rely on military strength or political alliances or wealth for his position and authority, but he was to look to the Lord. Solomon violated all of these prohibitions. Yep, King Solomon violated all 3 of these. He had many horses, he had many wives, and he had a lot of silver and gold. And David violated the last 2. Yeah, David had multiple wives, and he had a lot of silver and gold. And Solomon's wives brought idolatry into Jerusalem, which resulted into the kingdom being divided. 1 Kings 11, 1 through 43. Yep. Not good. Yep, Solomon turned away because he was with those pagan wives, and he didn't want to let him go, and he should have. And I think he built a room for one of his wives. I think it was from Pharaoh. It might have been Pharaoh's daughter or something like that. I don't remember. It's been a while since I looked at 1 Kings. But anyway, yeah, not good. And then, what about King Saul? He was the first of Israel's kings. I don't remember if he broke these 3 specifically. I don't remember. But I know he was still a pretty disobedient king, nevertheless. And God rejected him as king, ultimately, and took the spirit from him, and it went downhill from there. And then he spent a lot of his reign trying to kill David. So, all right, and then the king needs to write for himself a copy of this law in a book. And the ideal set forth was that of the king who was obedient to the will of God, which he learned from reading the law. And the result of his reading of the Pentateuch would be fear of the Lord and humility. And the king was pictured as a scribe and scholar of Scripture. Josiah reinstituted this approach at a bleak time in Israel's history. Yep. 2 Kings 22. Yep. King Josiah. He was one of the last good kings before Judah fell to Babylon. Yep, and ultimately the king needs to obey these commandments and not turn aside from them, and that, his heart may not be lifted above his brethren. The king was not to be above God's law any more than any other Israelite. Yeah, king is not above the rules. Yeah, king still had to obey God's laws. So, there you go. Yep, and Jesus is the only king who has done that. Yep, he only has one wife, the church. He could have had the nations and the silver and gold if he only worshipped Satan, but no, he did not. He refused all that. And he's coming in on a white horse one day, not multiple horses. So there you go. All right. Well, that's actually the end of chapter 17, so Lord willing, I'll see what Prager has to say next time. All right. God bless you.